A dying man's will was signed, but not by his intent. Welcome to Sayers and Secrets. I am your host, Samuel Drake. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're solving mysteries from. We're glad you're here. Your time and curiosity mean everything. Now the case begins. If I had a nickel for every time someone walked into the brownstone swearing they weren't here on business, I could afford to buy Fritz a sabbatical and Wolfe a whole new orchid wing. But this one came in with a parchment under one arm, an attitude under the other, and the kind of look in her eyes that said she knew exactly how much trouble she was bringing with her, and didn't care. She rang the bell at 11:42 a.m., which for our purposes is the equivalent of showing up at a monastery during morning prayer with a saxophone. I was heading into the front room with a coffee in one hand and the Times crossword in the other, so it fell to me to answer. Fritz had vanished back into the kitchen with a jar of pickled mushrooms and a gleam of culinary mischief. The woman at the door wore a tailored navy suit with white cuffs sharp enough to slice butter and a brooch shaped like a dagger, because why not be on the nose? She had auburn hair that didn't owe a cent to nature, and eyes that scanned the hallway behind me like she'd expected guards. Or ghosts. Miss, I offered, not opening the door all the way. Marian Vell, she said, with a voice that could bleach linen. I don't have an appointment. I also don't need one. I raised an eyebrow, not letting her past the threshold yet. You may want to lead with why that's true. She smiled, thin as a sword. I'm here on behalf of my uncle, Ernest Maddox. He's dying. He's asked me to engage Mr. Wolfe's services regarding the disposition of his estate. Ah, the magic word. Wolfe doesn't budge for politics, drama, or weather, but he's never met an estate dispute he didn't want to iron out with his tongue and a deduction. Mr. Maddox, the publisher? I asked. Of Maddox and Crane? Yes. And no. He hasn't touched the Crane side in 20 years. My uncle has spent the last decade revising his will every time a relative disappoints him. Which is to say, often. Sounds exhausting. For him, yes. For us, it's more like roulette. I stepped aside and waved her in. Wolfe's upstairs with the orchids, and he doesn't receive them before noon, unless it's murder, treason, or a food emergency. But I'll see what I can do. She passed me a manila folder, light but thick enough to promise reading material, and made her way into the front room like she'd been here before. Which I found interesting, because as far as I knew, she hadn't. I took the folder upstairs. Wolfe was facing his orchids like a man lecturing wayward children. He didn't look up when I entered, because of course he didn't. Client, I said. Technically. Says she's here for her uncle's sake, but her tone suggests she'd rewrite his obituary with a meat cleaver if he didn't beat her to it. Marian Vell, the uncle is Ernest Maddox. That got a glance. Ah, Wolfe said, very dry. Maddox is not dead yet. Not officially, but he's apparently rehearsing. I want your help regarding his will. Wolfe pinched the stem of a Miltoniopsis and gave it the kind of look that could curl petals. People nearing death seldom require sleuthing, only paperwork. This is more of the theatrical kind. Family drama. Revisions. Possibly a list of enemies disguised as heirs. He considered that. And you admit her. Only after she promised no saxophone. He sighed, set down his tools, and lumbered toward the door. I will descend at noon. Offer her beer. If she declines, make a note of it. Got it. 20 minutes later, Wolfe entered the office and took his seat with the gravity of a man accepting a papal audience. Marian Vell sat opposite him, legs crossed, hands folded over the folder like a bridge player about to deal high stakes. She waited exactly 2 seconds before speaking. My uncle has rewritten his will again. 2 days ago. He says it's final. But I don't believe that's true. Why? Wolfe asked, eyes closed, voice a soft baritone rumble. Because someone else has been rewriting it for him. I glanced over. That wasn't the sort of opener you toss out casually. Wolfe opened his eyes. You are alleging forgery. Not yet. I'm alleging influence, pressure, subversion. He nodded once, slowly. And the new will cut me out. But it names a woman Ernest hasn't seen in 30 years. A woman who nearly ruined his company and possibly his life. Now she's not only back, she's beneficiary number one. I looked over at Wolfe, who was not frowning, but also not still. For him that was equivalent to gasping aloud. And you, Wolfe said, wish me to confirm the source and intent of this revision. Why? She smiled again, just as thin, because whether or not it's legal, it's a betrayal. I don't care about the money. I care about what it says. I want the truth exposed before he dies, or before someone makes sure he does. That did it. Wolfe shifted in his chair. Not far, but enough. He reached for the folder and opened it. Very well, he said. You may proceed. When Nero Wolfe says, you may proceed, it doesn't mean what people think it means. He's not inviting conversation. He's issuing a summons, one that comes with implied seating arrangements, verbal boundaries, and the knowledge that any attempt at melodrama will be met with the full weight of his disdain. Marian Vell didn't flinch, which again I found interesting. She leaned forward with the sort of elegance they teach in finishing schools and whispered scandals, and handed over a single sheet from the folder, high-quality linen paper, with a pale watermark, and a signature that looked like it had been scrawled in a moving elevator. This is the latest revision, dated Tuesday, executed in my uncle's study, supposedly witnessed by his nurse and his lawyer. Wolfe took it, unfolded it delicately. He handled paper the way some men handle museum relics, and read in silence for a full minute. I'd seen that look before. It wasn't a curiosity, it was a classification. He wasn't reading the will, he was weighing it. Like a butcher eyeing a suspicious cut. When he finished, he set the sheet on his desk blotter, and finally looked at her, eyebrows twitching in mild irritation. Miss Vell, this document, though brief, is both precise and legally competent. What precisely compels you to believe it is fraudulent or coercive? She gave a small, sharp laugh. Because it's impossible. My uncle despised this woman, verbally, financially, publicly. Eleanor DeWitt nearly drove Maddox and Crane into receivership 28 years ago. She forged contracts, she leaked manuscripts, and allegedly, she tried to blackmail a sitting board member. Ernest spent $500,000 settling it out of court. And then he swore, in print and in bourbon, that if he ever saw her again, he'd rewrite her name into a police report. And now, Wolfe murmured, she's inherited his estate. Marian nodded. 70%, not including the rare books. Those, according to this revision, go to a freelance editor named Wilton Vire. No one's ever heard of him. Wolfe's eyebrows climbed. No one. Not the board, not the firm's partners, not even the secretary who's been with him since before Watergate. Have you inquired about the witnesses? Yes. His lawyer Halberd insists everything was in order. That my uncle was lucid and deliberate. He says Eleanor showed up a month ago, and Ernest reconciled with her. But Ernest hasn't left his townhouse in 6 months, and she's not exactly known for her bedside manner. Wolfe sniffed, which in his lexicon means he found that explanation deeply implausible, but not yet worthy of mockery. I presume your uncle's health is declining. That's a generous description. He has a rare bone disorder, brittle spine, organ complications. Some days he can sit up. Some days he doesn't know what decade it is. Is he capable of coherent testimony? Some days, and the others. He talks to his old business partner, who died in 1992. That got Wolfe to lean back, steepling his fingers. Miss Vell, your complaint is intriguing, but to act on it, I require access to your uncle, his circle, his premises, and this Mr. Witt. Do you believe your presence will facilitate that?" She looked away for the first time, eyes dropping to the carpet like it had spoken ill of her. "No. If I show up he'll shut down, or Eleanor will. She's in control now. Legally, emotionally, maybe even medically. She moved in last week. The nurse answers her. So does the lawyer." I whistled low. "That's cozy. Too cozy," Marion agreed. "Which is why I need you. Both of you, Wolfe, to see the shape of it. You step into the mess and find out who's propping it up." I admit the case was warming up. Not boiling, not yet, but there were enough elements to make it worth simmering. Rewritten wills, mysterious editors, a sick patriarch, and a woman with a past convenient enough to come back from the dead. Not to mention the faint perfume of inheritance desperation hanging in the air. Wolfe finally closed his eyes again, which meant he was done interviewing. "For now, I will require records," he said. "All iterations of the will, if available. Names and contact for the nurse, the lawyer, and this Mr. Vire. And of course Mr. Witt. You'll have them tomorrow." He inclined his head once. "Then I will accept the engagement provisionally, pending sufficient documentation, and one condition." She blinked. "Which is?" Wolfe opened his eyes and looked directly at her. "That you remain uninvolved. No surprise visits, no confrontations, no provocations. Archie will act as our emissary. I will manage the rest." To her credit, she didn't argue, but she also didn't smile. "That suits me," she said. "But one thing you should know. If Eleanor is behind this, she won't be intimidated. She's clever, patient, and dangerous when underestimated." Wolfe snorted softly. "Miss Vell, cleverness and patience are assets. Danger lies not in their presence, but their misuse. I am rarely misused." She stood, smoothed her coat, and gave me a look like we'd be seeing each other soon, on either a front porch or a battlefield. "I'll send the files by courier, by 10 tomorrow. You may see yourself out," Wolfe said, eyes already drifting toward his globe of Montenegro figs. "Mr. Goodwin will retrieve your coat," which I did. And when I opened the door, I saw it. A silver Mercedes idling at the curb. Behind the wheel was a woman with hair the color of tar and a cigarette balanced in her left hand. She didn't look at us. She just watched the door. "Friend of yours?" I asked. Marion glanced, just briefly. Shadow. Not friends. I shut the door behind her. Inside, Wolfe was already dialing the elevator. "I will have lunch in the dining room," he announced. "I'll alert Fritz," I said. "And then?" "You," Wolfe said, "will begin by identifying Wilton Vere. I suspect he is either fiction or something worse." "Worse than fiction?" "A misdirection," Wolfe said. "And I do not like being misdirected." The elevator clanked. The orchids waited. As I headed to my room to grab my coat and notebook, I paused in the hall and glanced back at the office. They will still lie on Wolfe's desk, neat and tidy, but the implications, messy, very messy. And I hadn't even met the cast yet. You can tell a lot about a man by the people willing to hover near his fortune. And judging by the lineup forming around Ernest Maddox, he was either beloved, loathed, or very close to dying with paperwork worth fighting over. My job, as always, was to stick my nose where it didn't belong and sniff out which version was the truth. Wolfe stayed planted in his chair, naturally, giving directions with the gravity of a Roman senator. I hit the pavement, starting with the name that most needed confirming, Wilton Vere. Wolfe had said it like the word tasted bad, and I didn't disagree. There's something about people who appear out of thin air that raises my internal thermometer. Editors don't typically drop from the sky to inherit books worth $500,000, so I called Lon Cohen at the Gazette. Lon's a journalist with a memory like a steel trap, and the moral flexibility of a nightclub bartender. He didn't waste time with greetings. "You never call unless someone's dead or lying," he said. "In this case," I replied, "they might be both." Ever heard of Wilton Vere, supposed to be a freelance editor, suddenly named in the will of Ernest Maddox? There was a pause on the line as Lon's brain did cartwheels. Vere, not in the Union, not in any publishing rosters I've seen. No freelance pieces, no credited work, nothing in the trades. The names are blank, which either means he's the best kept secret in publishing, or he's made up. I'll keep digging. Anything else? Yeah. Find out if Eleanor DeWitt resurfaced recently. The last public record I can find on her was a deposition in 2002, and then poof, will do. How soon do you need it? Yesterday. He grunted and hung up. Next I drove to Maddox's townhouse on West 73rd, one of those old-school brownstones with a polished brass knocker, the kind that says, "We still wear waistcoats here." I didn't go in. Wolfe's orders were clear: no contact with Maddox or Eleanor yet. Just eyes on the place. I did 2 loops around the block. On the 3rd pass I caught a glimpse of a woman stepping through the gate. Late 30s, nurse uniform under a pea coat, clipboard clutched like a weapon. I parked and approached her casually as she stepped off the stoop. "Excuse me," I said. "Are you Miss Lena Greer?" She blinked at me, guarded. "Who's asking?" "Archie Goodwin. I'm looking into some legal irregularities surrounding Mr. Maddox's estate. Your name came up." "That's because I signed the last will," she said, with more irritation than surprise. "Which was perfectly legal." He was lucid. He spoke clearly. He signed it with intent. Under whose supervision? His lawyer was present, so was Miss DeWitt. But I'm a licensed nurse, not a notary. I didn't orchestrate it. I witnessed it. Her eyes narrowed, daring me to argue. "So I didn't." "Not yet. Mind if I ask how long you've worked for Mr. Maddox?" 4 months. Through Aegis Medical Staffing. And before that, I was in palliative care in New Jersey, mostly oncology patients. "What's your impression of Mr. Maddox?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "Smart, stubborn, not always in the moment, but when he's there, he's sharp. He remembers names, dates, and books, especially books." "Does he talk about Miss DeWitt?" Another hesitation. Slightly longer. "Only lately. Said she was the only person who ever understood the soul of his catalogue. Whatever that means." I gave her a polite nod. "Thanks for your time, Miss Greer. You've been helpful." She didn't respond, just turned and walked briskly toward the corner. Back in the car I made notes. Wolfe liked patterns, and already they were starting to form. Next stop, the lawyer. Denton Halberd, ESQ. Occupied an office in Midtown that smelled like old varnish and lawsuits. He was in his 60s, thin as a paperclip, and wore spectacles with frames that hadn't been fashionable since Eisenhower. I was ushered in without much fuss. "I assume you're Mr. Wolfe's associate?" he asked, adjusting his tie. Miss Vell mentioned he might investigate. "What is it you want?" "Exactly." "Clarity. Starting with your opinion, was the last will valid?" "Absolutely. I supervised it myself." Maddox was alert, coherent, and very specific in his instructions. "Did he discuss his reasons?" "He said time changes loyalties. That he had reconsidered old grievances. He made it clear that Eleanor DeWitt had earned his forgiveness. And Wilton Vere?" Halberd frowned. "That was unusual. I don't know the man." Maddox dictated that portion without elaboration. "You've worked with Maddox before." "For 22 years. He wrote every one of his previous wills. This was the 6th. Was Miss Vell's exclusion ever discussed?" "I don't discuss my client's personal feelings. But yes, she was in earlier versions." "And this time?" He looked at me over his glasses. "This time she was not." I thanked him and left, chewing that over. That afternoon I returned to the brownstone and laid it out for Wolfe. He didn't speak while I briefed him, just sat there with his hands folded on his stomach, like he was digesting something slow and bitter. When I finished, he nodded once. Greer is competent, but possibly compromised. Halberd is a professional but compliant. And Miss DeWitt, she's the queen bee. No sightings today, but I'd bet money she's dictating the flow inside that townhouse. Wolfe gestured at the phone. Call Saul. I want surveillance on Via, if he exists, and call Fred. He'll tail Miss Greer. I picked up the receiver. And me? Wolfe reached for a new folder. One Marion had cored over, and opened it delicately. You will find and interview Eleanor DeWitt. Friendly or aggressive? Observant, Wolfe said. But be wary. Miss DeWitt is not a moth drawn to flame. She's the match. That night, I lay awake longer than usual, replaying the faces. The nurse with the careful answers. The lawyer with the ironed conscience. A ghost editor with a claim to rare books. And a woman who'd somehow climbed back into a man's life, just in time to inherit it. We had the suspects. Now came the question Wolfe liked best. Who among them understood how to twist the truth into something that looked legal and felt personal? In this business, some interviews open like a book, others slam like a vault. And when it came to Eleanor DeWitt, I expected the latter. She'd been the phantom centerpiece of this whole performance, cropping up out of nowhere, turning a sick man's will inside out, and doing it all without leaving fingerprints. The only people who saw her lately were employees of Ernest Maddox. That alone made her slippery. Finding her wasn't a challenge. Saul Panzer, whose nose is sharp enough to sniff out secrets through lead walls, had already tracked her movements from Maddox's townhouse to a suite at the Halberd Hotel on Madison. A posh, discreet place with a bellhop who pretended not to recognize movie stars and a front desk that wouldn't give up a name if you showed up with a subpoena. Luckily, I wasn't working with a subpoena, just charm and a freshly pressed suit. Miss DeWitt is in Suite 9C, said the clerk, after a little dance around the subject. She may not be taking visitors. I'm not a visitor, I said. I'm having a conversation. I rode the elevator up to the 9th floor, walked the corridor lined with abstract paintings I wouldn't hang in a garage, and knocked twice. A voice called, low and measured. Yes? I opened the door just far enough to lean in. Archie Goodwin. I'd like a word if it suits you. There was a pause. Then, come in. But keep your intentions visible. Which was an interesting way to phrase it. The suite was bathed in late morning light, framed by gold drapes and soft music from a vintage phonograph, Billie Holiday, no less. Eleanor DeWitt stood near a bar cart, pouring herself a very deliberate glass of something light and bitter. She wore a slate-gray blouse with pearl buttons and slacks that suggested comfort over flash. Her hair was dark and pulled back, and her eyes were a color you could never quite name. So, she said, Maddox sent you. No, I replied. He's currently inaccessible, medically and legally. I come on behalf of someone else. Someone who doubts the legitimacy of your sudden elevation in his will. She took a sip, walked to the window, and looked out. I suppose that's Marion. Correct. She always was theatrical. I took a chair by the fireplace. Most people don't consider being disinherited a performance. She turned, glass in hand, and gave me a look that could strip varnish. Let's not pretend she's acting out of loyalty. Marion doesn't want the will examined. She wants it undone. Then help me understand. Maddox hadn't spoken your name aloud for almost 30 years. Then boom, here you are. In his home, in his will, and apparently in control. I didn't force my way in, Mr. Goodwin. Ernest invited me. He wrote me a letter in February. Said he regretted our rift, said he was dying. He asked me to visit. I did. Why would he suddenly change his mind? Because time changes people. Because grudges rot in place. Because maybe, just maybe, he realized I was right back then. About what? She studied me for a moment, then sat across from me, with the poise of someone used to being questioned but rarely confronted. In 1996, I warned Ernest his junior partner was embezzling royalties from overseas translations. He didn't believe me. I thought I was being paranoid. Said I was too emotional to be useful. So I left, and yes, I made noise. I embarrassed him. But I was also right. And now he has no partners left. Just a lawyer, a nurse and a niece who sees his library as a checkbook. I'm the only one who understands what those books mean. And Wilton Vire. She smiled at that tight, unreadable. He's a literary historian. Very discreet. Ernest brought him on to curate the first editions. He's a ghost in the industry, but he knows value. Ghost is right, I said. So far, he's got no published work, no editorial history, and no records in any database we can find. She shrugged. Then perhaps that's his gift. Some people build legacies quietly. I leaned forward. Tell me this, why give him the books? Why not you? Her tone dropped a notch. Because I didn't ask for them. We sat for a moment in silence. I studied her posture, her words, and the small details, half-sipped drink, no visible phone, and a folder of handwritten notes on the table. I want to meet Vire, I said. That's up to him, she replied. But if you do, be respectful. He doesn't like games. I stood. Neither does Wolfe. Her smile faded just slightly, enough to notice. Tell him this, she said. Whatever people are whispering, I didn't force Ernest into anything. I didn't forge a signature. I didn't lock Marion out. I was asked back. That's all. Fair enough. As I left the suite, I checked the hallway. Empty. Saul had been right. DeWitt moved quietly, and rarely alone. Someone was keeping an eye, either hers or someone else's. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened to the report in silence, fingers pressed together like he was praying for the truth to stay put. When I finished, he grunted. She is composed, like dry ice. She is also practicing. Her narrative is rehearsed, still convincing. For now, he said, but she has provided a pivot, meaning. She has introduced a motive to her own benevolence, regret, correction, legacy, and Vire. Remains opaque. We will need Saul to observe her movements for the next 48 hours. And you, yes, you will find this Wilton Vire. Use Lan, use Fred, use a crowbar if needed. No forgeries, just facts. Wolfe nodded. Precisely. As I stepped out again, this time into the late evening haze of July, I knew we were inching closer, not to a suspect, necessarily, but to the shape of the scheme. This wasn't just about money, it was about a message. Whoever rewrote that testament didn't just want the assets, they wanted the last word, which, in Wolfe's world, is dangerous territory. If you want to know whether someone has something to hide, you don't ask them. You watch how they touch their keys, how they close a drawer, how they flinch when you move toward the edge of something private. By now I'd seen enough players on the board to know we weren't dealing with a sloppy con job. This thing had been built slowly, layered with care, and it didn't squeak when it moved. But even the best-kept lies leave fingerprints when they reach for the ink. It was Wolfe who noticed it first, not in a loud, look-at-me way, but in the middle of one of his daily routines. I had just returned from a visit to the State Library archives, trying to dig up anything resembling a credential for Wilton Vire. Spoiler alert, nothing. No published work, no educational history, no records of editing, no grant applications, and no employment that didn't smell like fiction. If Vire existed, he was either deep underground or freshly minted. Wolfe, meanwhile, was sitting in the plant room with his arms folded and a look on his face like one of the orchids had cursed at him. "Archie," he said suddenly, "bring me the Maddox folder." I did. It was in the third drawer of the file cabinet, labeled in my own tidy script with a little star, "Wolfe hates but tolerates." When I handed it over, he opened it, leafed through 4 pages, stopped, and said, "This is not how it was arranged." "Pardon. This page," he said, tapping it, was on the left. The letterhead faced inward, now it faces out. Maybe Fritz moved it. Fritz has not touched this office since Tuesday. Could be I reshuffled it when I photocopied it. You did not. I would have noticed, the corners were aligned with excessive neatness. This is a reinsertion, which, in Wolfe's mind, was not far from a home invasion. I turned to check the cabinet. No marks, no scratches. The folder itself was undisturbed, no creases, no bent corners, nothing obvious. But Wolfe was right. The pages weren't in the order we'd had them. And one sheet, an early draft from April, was missing. That one had Marion listed as executor, I said aloud. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Yes, that is why its absence matters. So someone got in, pulled a sheet, and replaced the rest, and did so with enough care to avoid disrupting the cabinet, the folder, or the security of the office. Meaning it wasn't an outsider. Not necessarily. But it was someone skilled and motivated. My mind raced. Only a handful of people had ever stepped foot into this room since the case began. Marion, once. Fritz only in passing. May, and now possibly, a visitor we hadn't even seen. I checked the windows, locked. I checked the desk drawer, unmoved. But then I paused at the wastebasket, tucked near the bottom, under an old envelope, and yesterday's newspaper, was a small torn corner of pale grey stationery. Expensive. Faint watermark. "Wolfe," I said, holding it up. He took it with a tissue, held it to the light, and frowned. "That is not from our files." "Nope." Then someone brought their own note, and left a piece behind. I bagged it, marked the find, and made a note in our records. Wolfe had gone silent, which I recognized as his version of a mental thunderstorm. Finally he said, "We are no longer investigating merely a revision of the testament, we are investigating intrusion, manipulation of the documentary record. This is direct interference, and you think it's the same hand that made the changes to the will. I think it is the same hand that wants Miss Vell erased." I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, "Should we notify her?" "No," Wolfe said. "We observe." That afternoon, Saul returned with notes from 2 days of surveillance on Eleanor DeWitt. She'd made 6 calls from her suite, received 3 unlogged visits, and had 1 lengthy meeting outside the Halbert Hotel, at a private club in Midtown, the kind where men still wear cufflinks to drink gin. The person she met, a publishing agent, named Stuart Lang, known for taking on messy estates and out-of-print war memoirs. No official link to Maddox or the current case. Wolfe looked at the notes and tapped the name with his index finger. "Lang once handled a posthumous collection from Asher Crane," he said. "As in Maddox and Crane." "Yes, that was after Crane's suicide. It was a literary nightmare, 2 forged chapters, a dispute with the widow, and allegations of editorial theft." "So you think Lang's involved?" "I think Miss DeWitt is isolating herself. She knows the risks, she's building a cover." I nodded. "And the missing draft? What's the play there?" "Simple," Wolfe said. "To weaken Marion's claim. To establish that she was never intended as executor in any consistent revision. But she was. You saw the draft." "I did. And now it is gone." I stood and paced the room once. Something was chewing at me. Who had the opportunity? I said aloud, "Who's been near that cabinet? Who could slip in, grab a sheet, and not trip the whole desk. Wolfe didn't respond, but he reached for the phone and dialed a number I hadn't expected. "Miss Greer," he said, when someone answered. "Yes. Lena, this is Nero Wolfe. A brief question during your visit here on Tuesday. Were you alone at any time in the front room?" I could hear the pause from 10 feet away. Then she said, audibly, "Only when your assistant left to answer the kitchen phone." Wolfe nodded slowly. "I see, thank you." He hung up. "She was left alone for 42 seconds, he said, which evidently was enough. I exhaled. So Lena Greer, nurse witness, side player, isn't so neutral after all. "No," Wolfe said. "She is very much involved. And if I am correct, she is not loyal to Mr. Maddox, nor to Eleanor DeWitt. She is loyal to herself. Or someone else entirely." We sat with that for a moment, the air in the office thick with the realization. Then Wolfe said something I hadn't heard from him in a while. "This," he murmured, "is becoming interesting. And when he says that, it means something is about to break open. There are different kinds of pressure in an investigation. Some come in loud and fast, like a threat tossed over the phone, or a knife at the back. Others arrive quieter, like a door left open that should have been locked, or a name dropped one too many times, by people who swear they never met. Wolfe preferred the latter, pressure that accumulated, like humidity in a locked room, unseen but heavy. And today it started to seep through the walls of the brownstone. It began with a knock. Not a client's knock, not a delivery, and definitely not someone confused about the address. This was a firm, deliberate knock, 3 times, spaced like a metronome. I answered it with the kind of caution you reserve for process servers, or people holding unmarked envelopes. The man on the stoop looked like he'd been born in a law library, and hadn't left since. Gray suit, gray skin, gray expression. His tie was plain, his shoes gleamed, and his eyes did something unsettling. "Archie Goodwin?" he asked. "Occasionally," I said. "Depending on the hour." He handed me a card. Heavy stock, no logo, just a name and a phone number. "Clive Rantham, Private Counsel Advisory Consultant to the Maddox Estate. May I speak with Mr. Wolfe?" "About?" "I'm here as a courtesy," he said, "to remind Mr. Wolfe that the Maddox will in its present form has been properly filed with the court. Any public discussion or implication of fraud may be treated as defamation. You may pass that along." I didn't blink. "And what should I pass along if I say you're bluffing?" He gave me the ghost of a smile. "Then I'll return with an injunction." I shut the door without offering him a seat. Wolfe was in the office, not reading, not writing, just waiting, the way he sometimes does when he knows the conversation is already headed his way. "Legal saber rattling," I told him. "Mr. Rantham, Advisory Counsel to the estate, says we're on the verge of defamation." "I am not deterred," Wolfe said. "Nor surprised. Did DeWitt send him?" "No. Eleanor is shrewd, but she favors social maneuvering. Rantham's entrance is corporate. This comes from someone who wants to tighten the lid, not stir the pot." I looked at the business card again. Could be Halberd, or someone else from the firm's board trying to keep things clean. "No," Wolfe said. "It is not Halberd's style, and the board has no interest in Maddox's personal bequests. This is someone protecting a larger asset, perhaps literary rights or unseen documents." "Via again." Wolfe paused. "Perhaps," he said. "But we still lack a body to the name. Until Saul returns with confirmation of his existence, we assume every person attached to this will, save Maddox himself, may be operating under false pretenses." I jotted that down, Wolfe's shorthand for nobody is safe yet. That night, I called Lon Cohen again. "Anything on Via?" I asked. Lon sounded annoyed, which meant he was still empty-handed. "Not a damn thing." If he's a real editor, he's never left a paper trail. No contracts, no payments, no web presence. I found one tax ID linked to that name. It's defunct. Filed in Albany 6 years ago, then nothing. What about you? Voter roll, lease, library card, zip. If he exists, he's hiding behind something. Or someone. We hung up, and I paced the kitchen until Fritz gently suggested I was disrupting his veal reduction. I took the hint. The next morning brought the second pressure point, a break-in. Not at the brownstone, and not at Maddox's place either. This time, it was Marion. She showed up at our door, face tight, eyes lined with something she wasn't quite ready to call fear. My apartment was entered last night, she said. They didn't take anything. Not officially, but my desk was opened, and files were moved. Someone read through my correspondence with Ernest. Wolfe gestured for her to sit, but he didn't ask questions immediately. He let her talk, his way of seeing if a story broke under its own weight. It wasn't random, she continued. Nothing else was touched. They didn't take the silver, they didn't even check the closet safe. Just the desk drawers. Someone wanted to know what I had, or what I knew. Did you report it to the police? I asked. She hesitated. No, not yet. I didn't want it on record, unless you told me to. Wolfe finally spoke. You were right not to. It would only attract attention before we are ready. Do you know who might have a key to your apartment? No one. But the lock's not difficult. It could have been picked. I nodded. Or duplicated. Someone would have followed you. She looked over at me, and for the first time since she'd walked in, she showed something raw. This thing is bigger than a will, isn't it? Wolfe's tone stayed neutral. It is more deliberate than a mere revision. It is a campaign. To do what? To remove you from history. Quietly. She didn't speak after that. Wolfe dismissed her politely, with a promise to contact her soon. When the door shut behind her, he turned to me. Call Saul. Tell him to follow Halbert. Not DeWitt. She knows she's being watched. Halbert does not. If this is about document control, he may reveal more under pressure. I made the call. Saul, efficient as ever, confirmed he'd take the assignment. Meanwhile, I kept digging into Via. Every route I took was dead-ended. Until Fred Durkin, working separately, came back with a scrap. Found someone using the name Wilton Via, he told me over the phone. Real estate license expired in 2011. Lived in upstate New York for 3 years, then vanished. Any photo, got one. But it's £30 and 20 years old. Send it. When it arrived, Wolfe took one look at the face and said, Not a ghost, a chameleon. You recognize him? I do not. But I recognize his kind. Someone who reinvents themselves with just enough truth to appear legitimate. And now he reappears as a literary expert, long enough to inherit something nobody can verify. The books. I nodded. So the will revision wasn't about forgiveness or legacy. It was a staged performance. Yes, Wolfe said. And we must now consider the possibility that Ernest Maddox himself was never fully aware of what he signed. That's when the final piece of pressure dropped. A call from Halbert's office. The secretary, nervous and unsure, said she'd just found something odd, a second unsigned draft of the will. Not stored with the official papers, filed in a personal drawer, handwritten notes in Maddox's old scrawl. And in this version, Marion Vell was not only included, she was the primary heir. I asked to see it immediately. She agreed. I was out the door before Wolfe could object. In the cab uptown, I kept thinking one thing. The storm was close now, and someone somewhere was about to run out of places to hide. There's a particular energy in Wolfe's office when he's closing in on something.
Not excitement. That's not his style. It's more like gravity. The room gets quieter, slower, and heavier, as if everything not directly involved in the case gets pushed out by the sheer force of his concentration. The orchids, the newspaper, the afternoon beer, they're all afterthoughts. When Wolfe focuses, the world narrows, and you either keep up or get left on the curb. I returned from Halbert's office with the unsigned will in my coat, and it might as well have been ticking. The secretary had slipped it to me in a manila envelope with hands that shook just enough to make her wedding ring click against the edge of the desk. It was real, all right. Old Maddox's handwriting. Smudged ink. The date was 2 weeks before the supposed final revision. And Marion Vell was named as primary heir and literary executor. Wolfe took the envelope with care, opened it without comment, and read through it slowly, twice. Then he laid it flat on the desk, adjusted it a half-inch and said, "This draft was never meant to be found."
Halbert says it wasn't part of the official file, I told him. Filed separately. Probably forgotten. Possibly hidden. Wolfe nodded. Possibly by Halbert himself. You think he's complicit? I think Halbert is careful. He follows instructions. But if a client asks him to ignore something, or delay it, he does. It is his definition of loyalty. Dangerous in the wrong hands. DeWitt's hands? Or someone else's? He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. A sign that gears were turning under the hood. "We have 5 players," he said. "Miss Vell, Miss DeWitt, Mr. Halbert, Miss Greer, and this elusive Wilton Vire, all connected to the final version of the will, each with access, direct or indirect, to Maddox's time, trust, or vulnerability. And at least 2 of them have touched our investigation directly," I added. "Greer tampered with our files." Halbert's office held the draft back. Wolfe opened his eyes. "It is time to let them know the game is changing." That was Wolfe's version of battle drums. He called Saul Panzer first. "I want Halbert to be aware he is being followed," Wolfe instructed. "Let him see you once. Let him guess the rest." Saul's voice on the line was as dry as dust. Subtle menace. "Got it." Next was Fred. Shift to Vire. He's surfaced before, he'll surface again. When he does, I want a photograph and a timeline. Full shadow. Then he turned to me. "You will invite Miss DeWitt to the brownstone." I raised an eyebrow. Polite or pointed? Formally polite, but with a time limit. "She will be told you are delivering evidence, and that I have questions only she can answer. And if she declines, she will not." He was right, of course. Eleanor DeWitt didn't decline. She didn't even pretend to hesitate. When I called and gave her the pitch, documents, clarity, closure, she said she'd arrive at 6 o'clock sharp. No entourage, no legal muscle, just her. Which was interesting. When 6 arrived, she was on time and dressed like she was giving a eulogy. Black silk coat, silver brooch, and eyes that scanned every room, as if they were missing a painting. Wolfe did not stand when she entered. He gestured to the red leather chair across from him and waited. "Miss DeWitt," he said, "thank you for coming." "I never decline an invitation from someone clever," she said. Wolfe allowed a thin smile. "Then let us test that generosity." He placed the unsigned draft of the will on the desk between them. Her eyes flicked down to it, paused, and returned to him. "Where did you get that?" "Miss Vell did not provide it," Wolfe said. "Nor did Mr. Halbert. It was located in an unofficial storage space, marked by neither name nor docket. It contradicts the will you witnessed, and were party to." DeWitt said nothing. Wolfe leaned forward. "This draft names Miss Vell as executor. It bequeaths the first editions to the Public Library Archive, not to Mr. Vire. And it includes language of reconciliation, language absent from the final version. Still nothing, but the pause spoke. "You believe I suppressed it," she said, finally. "I believe you were present when it was rewritten. Whether you were the architect or the tool remains to be seen." She tilted her head, as if amused. "I didn't coerce Ernest Maddox," she said. "He made his own choices. I gave him perspective. The rest was his." "You mean you reminded him of old wounds?" "I reminded him of who cared about his legacy. Marion wanted his books boxed and sold. I wanted them preserved, through a phantom editor, with no history." She met Wolfe's gaze with steel. "Wilton Vire is not a phantom. He is simply discreet." Wolfe sat back, as are most aliases, that landed. I saw it, a flash in her eyes, just enough. Wolfe pressed, "Tell me, Mr. Witt, is Vire your invention or your accomplice?" Her lips parted, then closed. No answer. Wolfe changed tack. "Let me explain what happens next. I will summon all parties to this office tomorrow evening. The witnesses, the lawyer, the nurse Mr. Vire, if he can be located, and Miss Vell. I will lay out the progression of the will, the timing of each change, and the inconsistencies in each revision's execution." Sounds theatrical. It will be conclusive. I advise you, if you have anything else to disclose, to do so now. She stood. "You like pressure, Mr. Wolfe, but not everyone crumbles under it." "No," Wolfe said calmly. "Some wait until it passes, and then sweep up what's left." She left without another word. When the door closed, Wolfe looked at me. "She is not the source." "Then who?" He reached for his beer. "We are being misdirected again. But we are close." I nodded slowly. "So tomorrow's the gathering?" "Yes. Call them all. Tell them Mr. Maddox's estate is now under scrutiny, and that I intend to present findings. If they wish to protect their roles or legacies, they should attend." I made the calls that night. Halberd hesitated, then agreed. Greer sounded distant but confirmed. Fred reported that Vire had finally emerged, meeting someone quietly in Brooklyn. He would be followed. And Marion, she was the last call I made. She said only, "Tell Mr. Wolfe, I'll be there, and thank him. Not for the invitation, for the pressure." We were past questions now. Tomorrow Wolfe would turn the screws, and whatever was hiding under the surface would have no choice left but to rise. There's an art to staging a confrontation. Wolfe doesn't do dramatics. No surprise reveals, no thunderclaps or false alarms. When he sets the table, it's like a chess match being played by candlelight, quiet, precise, and inevitable. And when the guests are seated, there's only one person who knows all the moves ahead of time. At precisely 7 o'clock they arrived. First was Denton Halberd, looking freshly shaved, and twice as nervous as the last time he visited. He carried a briefcase that stayed shut the entire evening. He greeted me with a tight nod, then took a seat farthest from Wolfe's desk. Next was Lena Greer, the nurse, still in plain clothes, grey slacks, pale blouse, no jewelry, and a calm that looked rehearsed. She avoided everyone's eyes, but didn't seem afraid. She sat beside Halberd, back straight, expression unreadable. Eleanor DeWitt came third. As expected, she was dressed like she might be attending either a funeral or a press conference. Black suit, polished heels, and a silk scarf that looked expensive enough to have its own insurance policy. She offered Wolfe a nod, but didn't bother pretending it was friendly. Fred Durkin arrived last, escorting a man in his mid-50s, narrow-shouldered and awkward, with a comb-over that had lost its wall with time. He wore a checked blazer, outdated glasses, and a discomfort that trailed behind him like mist. "Wilton Vire," Fred said quietly. "Caught him coming out of a studio in Dumbo. Said he was consulting on some rare texts. Vire didn't shake hands. He didn't speak. He just lowered himself into the final empty chair and blinked like he'd been pulled out of a dark room and into bright light. I stood by the wall, notebook in hand. Wolfe didn't look up at first. He was studying a paper on his desk, the unsigned draft of Maddox's will. When he finally raised his head, he did what he always does in these sessions. He didn't start with questions. He started with facts. "I have asked you all here," he began, "because the document filed as the final will of Ernest Maddox is not in fact the final word on his intent. It is a document prepared under dubious circumstances, witnessed by two individuals with compromised interests, and submitted by counsel, who withheld at least one contradictory draft." Halberd opened his mouth, but Wolfe stopped him with a glance. "No interruptions." "Not yet." He turned slightly to Vire. "Mr. Vire, you were named as beneficiary of Mr. Maddox's personal library. Rare editions, some annotated, some unpublished, estimated to be worth nearly $500,000. What relationship did you have with Mr. Maddox?" Vire shifted and coughed once. His voice was surprisingly high. "We met through a literary circle. Online. He liked my commentary on canonical editing. We corresponded for a year. Then he invited me to evaluate some of his holdings, and this resulted in his naming you sole heir to the collection. He said I understood their value, more than his family did." Wolfe nodded. "Have you ever met Miss Vell?" "No." "Did you ever work for Maddox formally?" "No. He offered payment, but I declined. I considered it academic." Wolfe turned to Halberd. "Mr. Halberd, when you filed the final will, did you verify the background of Mr. Vire?" Halberd cleared his throat. "I did not. Maddox was insistent. He provided the name and intent. And you did not question the absence of legal documentation connecting Vire to the estate?" "I asked. He said the books were his to give." "Convenient." Wolfe turned next to Lena Greer. "Miss Greer, you witnessed the signing of the revised will. Do you believe Ernest Maddox was of sound mind?" She hesitated. "He had good days and bad days. That day, it was good enough." He spoke clearly. "Did you see him read the document before signing?" She frowned. "He said he had." "That was not my question." "No. He didn't read it aloud. But he wasn't blind, Mr. Wolfe." Wolfe folded his hands. "He wasn't blind, but he was tired. On medication, and by your own account, frequently detached from time. Would you say he was easily influenced?" Greer looked down at her hands. "Yes." Wolfe let the silence thicken for a beat, then turned to Eleanor. "Miss DeWitt, you were present during the drafting of the final revision?" "Yes." "Did you dictate any part of it?" "I suggested nothing," she said quickly. "Ernest asked me to bring Halberd. I was there out of courtesy. And Vire's inclusion." She looked at the man, then back at Wolfe. "That was Ernest's idea." Wolfe leaned forward slightly. "No, it was yours." The room tensed. "I have evidence," Wolfe said smoothly, "that you met Wilton Vire 3 years ago in a publishing settlement negotiation. He was using another name then, Lyle Vincent. He worked for a literary agent in Connecticut. You reconnected him with Maddox and presented him as a neutral third party. You coached him on the collection. You built his image, not as an heir, as a tool." Vire looked stunned. "That's not," he began. "You didn't know you were inheriting the collection, did you?" Wolfe asked. "No," Vire admitted. She said Maddox needed someone reliable enough to disappear after receiving the bequest." No answer. Wolfe didn't press. He turned to Halberd. "And now, Mr. Halberd, I must ask, did you at any point become aware of an alternate version of the will?" Halberd paused, then gave a small nod. "Yes. It was handwritten, unfiled. I found it in Maddox's study drawer,
after the revised version had been signed. Why did you not disclose it? Because I assumed Maddox had changed his mind. You assumed, but you did not ask. No. Wolfe finally turned to Lena. Miss Greer, the cabinet in this office was tampered with. A document was removed. Ray inserted. You were the only visitor alone in this office since the case began. Greer didn't respond. Wolfe's tone cooled further. Did you remove a draft of the April will at Miss DeWitt's request? She swallowed. She asked me to see what Wolfe had. Said it would help clarify the chain. I didn't steal anything. I just rearranged. That is sufficient, Wolfe said. Thank you. He let the silence linger one final time. Then he said, this is what happened. Eleanor DeWitt sought to restore her standing in Maddox's life, not for love or reconciliation, but for literary control. She needed the collection, the legacy, and above all the authority. She couldn't inherit outright. It would seem crass. So she recruited Via, reconstructed his identity, and presented him as an expert. Maddox, confused, compliant, and medicated, accepted the suggestion. Wolfe looked to Halberd. You, sir, enabled this by inaction, and Miss Greer provided access. None of you, perhaps, committed overt fraud, but together you rewrote history. No one spoke. Then Wolfe delivered the final line. The will must be contested, and I will testify to that effect. He stood, rare for him, and nodded to me. Show them out. One by one, they filed out. No one argued. Not even Eleanor. Outside, the air was still. Inside, the case was finished. But Wolfe wasn't smiling. He never smiles when the solution confirms what he already suspected. That cleverness is too often used for conquest, not for justice. Justice, when it finally arrives at the brownstone, doesn't knock loudly. It eases in with the weight of a case closed, and the inevitability of Wolfe's logic bearing down on those who thought they could game the system. The following morning wasn't filled with applause or press conferences. It was filled with eggs, silence, and the faint smell of victory that Fritz tried, and failed, to season out of the air. By 10 o'clock, the guests were gone. The unsigned will was already on its way to a probate attorney. Wolfe trusted more than he trusted Halberd's integrity, which is to say, at all. Marion had left early, with a quiet thank you that didn't quite reach her eyes. She wasn't celebrating, not yet, because the fight ahead wasn't over, but now at least, it had a foundation built on fact.
Wolfe, for his part, was in the plant room with the small white orchid, staring at it like it had offended him. He didn't speak when I entered, didn't even look my way, until I cleared my throat. Well? I asked. She will not challenge the conclusion, he said. DeWitt? Yes, she has already called Halberd. She will instruct him to step down as executor and relinquish all claims to oversight. Via, predictably, has vanished again. I thought Fred was tailing him. He followed him as far as the subway. After that, Via changed coats and disappeared into Midtown. Should we find him? No, he has no further leverage and no further use. I leaned against the greenhouse wall and crossed my arms. That was tidy. It was overdue. There was something final in Wolfe's tone. Not triumph, not even satisfaction, just certainty. The kind that comes from pulling a thread and watching the whole fabric fold the way you knew it would. Still, I had questions. What about Greer? I asked. She tampered with evidence. She played both sides. She was manipulated, Wolfe said. Not innocent, but not central. Her career is over. That will suffice. And Halberd will resign from the board of Maddox and Crane before the week is out. He's already contacted a partner. I expect a very quiet departure. And Eleanor? Wolfe finally turned to me. She will vanish again, for a while. perhaps to Europe, perhaps to some literary sanctuary, but she will not return to the Maddox legacy. That door has been closed. I nodded. You were right. She didn't want the money. She wanted control. Yes. The books were a symbol. The real target was narrative authority. Maddox's story, his myth. She wanted to write the ending, and instead, I said, you did. Wolfe scowled at that. I do not write endings, Archie. I will reveal them. I smiled. Same difference. We returned to the office around noon. Fritz served cold roast chicken with tarragon, which Wolfe praised with a grunt. We didn't speak for a while. There was no need. The air in the brownstone was beginning to settle again, still not quite back to equilibrium, but no longer humming with deceit. I brought out the case notes and did my final entries, the way Wolfe insists, complete, clear and ready for review if we're ever dragged into court, which, given the shape of things, was unlikely. Marion would challenge the will. Yes, but with Wolfe's findings and the alternate draft now validated, the law would do the rest, slowly but surely. After lunch, Wolfe lit a cigar, a rare indulgence post-midday, which told me his appetite for closure was, for once, stronger than his appetite for routine. You know, I said, there's still something that bugs me. Only one thing, Wolfe said without looking up. Why not just steal the collection? DeWitt had access. Via could have boxed it up, claimed it as a gift, and disappeared. Why go to all the trouble of rewriting a will? Because theft is temporary, Wolfe said. Inheritance is permanent. That landed. I gave a low whistle. She wanted to be part of the record. Exactly. If she had stolen the books, she would be a criminal. If she inherited them, she would be a custodian. History treats them very differently. I nodded. Smart. Too smart, Wolfe said. That is always the danger. At 3:30, the phone rang. I picked it up. It was Marion. I just wanted to say thank you, she said. For everything. Mr. Wolfe was Wolfe, I said. Don't thank him until the court signs off. I know, she said. Then added, but I'll sleep tonight. For the first time in a while, after I hung up, Wolfe raised an eyebrow. Gratitude. Hard-earned, I said. Maybe sincere. He considered that. She will prevail in court, he said. If not through the law, then through exhaustion. The opposing parties have lost their cohesion. And their nerves, I added. Wolfe gave a rare quiet chuckle, a common result when the truth becomes inconvenient. We returned to silence. He returned to his chair, and I watched the clock roll past 4, which meant the day was winding down. A will had been rewritten. A legacy had been manipulated. But Wolfe had peeled it all back with nothing more than conversation, inference, and the insistence that people, no matter how clever, leave patterns behind. He hadn't stood for any of it. Not once. He'd stayed right there in his chair and pulled every string with the same weapon he always used, his mind. And in the end, the players had all come to him, because they always do. As the light faded through the office windows, Wolfe broke the quiet with a single line. A man's will is not just a list, he said. It is a reflection. I looked up. Of what? Of whom he feared, and who he trusted. He stubbed out the cigar and closed his eyes. That is why it matters who holds the pen. I let that hang in the air. Then I said, and here I thought it was all about the books. He didn't respond, which in Wolfe's language meant the lesson had been delivered. The case was closed. Dinner would be at 7, and all was almost quiet again, at the brownstone. In the brownstone, quiet isn't just an absence of noise, it's a return to natural order. When a case ends, especially one that leaves the room smelling faintly of betrayal and legal ink, Wolfe retreats to routine, with the kind of devotion monks show to prayer. Fritz, liberated from mealtime delays and unscheduled interviews, resumes full control of the kitchen. The orchids get more attention than the phone, and I, having filled out the last case note and filed the receipts from taxis, coffee, and bribes, get exactly 3 hours of blissful inactivity before Wolfe finds something else to occupy my time. This time, I was lucky. The day after the final gathering, we started late. Wolfe remained in the plant rooms until nearly 11, tinkering with a new root medium Fritz had ordered from a specialty greenhouse in Vermont. He didn't mention the case. He didn't need to. It had ended cleanly, and as far as Wolfe was concerned, justice had taken its proper shape. Not loudly, not forcefully, but logically. I was in the office, reading the Morning Gazette. Lon had published a small piece about a quiet dispute involving the late publisher Ernest Maddox, with no names but a few too perfect hints. It was enough to make insiders nod, knowingly, and outsiders skim past it. Wolfe had no objection. He only raised concern when ink touched his name, which this time it didn't. At noon, Marion called again. She didn't want anything. No update, no advice, not even reassurance. She just said, "I thought you'd want to know. The probate court accepted the draft. My attorney says we'll have a formal hearing in 2 weeks." "That's fast," I said. "They didn't like the smell of the original submission," she replied. "Your report helped. So did the testimony Wolfe sent. It wasn't just persuasive, it was final." I passed that along to Wolfe when he came down for lunch. He gave a single nod, then asked Fritz to add capers to the veal. After lunch, I reviewed the full cast one last time. Eleanor DeWitt had vanished from public view. Saul reported she'd flown to Lisbon 2 days earlier on a one-way ticket, using a passport under her real name, which it turned out wasn't Eleanor DeWitt at all, but Eleanor Det, her original surname, before her brief theatrical stint in the 80s. Wolfe wasn't surprised. He said it was typical of a woman who wanted control. Even her name was a performance. Wilton Vire, or Lyle Vincent, depending on the decade, had likewise retreated into the fog. Fred spotted him boarding a bus in Jersey, with a duffel and a book under his arm. No forwarding address. No trace of ambition left behind. Wolfe said he would resurface in some small-town historical society, misquoting Latin and charming board members with tales of editorial purity. Greer was fired, as predicted. Her agency issued a formal apology to Marion and offered a different nurse. Marion declined. She'd taken her uncle's last few days back under her own care. Halberd resigned from Maddox and Crane without a fight. He would land softly, probably in a smaller firm with no legacies to protect. All in all, the dominoes fell as Wolfe had arranged them. He didn't gloat. He never does. He just resumed his regular schedule, like nothing had happened. Because to him, that's the whole point. Restoration. At 3 o'clock, I went into the kitchen for a coffee refill. Fritz had finished making a pistachio tart for the evening meal, and the air smelled of citrus and crushed sugar. He gave me a look, his version of permission, and I stole a spoonful of ganache from the edge. "You know," I said, "there's something eerie about how fast things snap back here." Fritz glanced up from his pan. "Is that not what you want?" I thought about it. It was. Back in the office, Wolfe was already deep into a monograph on culinary herbs in the Balkans. I took my seat, propped up my feet, and waited for the inevitable moment he'd remember some letter that needed dictating, or a bill I hadn't filed yet. Instead he surprised me. "Archie," he said, without looking up, "did you ever wonder why I accepted this case?" "Not especially," I said. "You dislike wills. You dislike emotion, and you especially dislike people who lie about either." He grunted. "True.
but I accepted it within 10 minutes. That is unlike me. I put down the Gazette. All right, why did you? He didn't answer immediately. Just turned a page, read a line, and then closed the book. When Marion Vell mentioned Maddox had rewritten his will to name a woman he hadn't seen in 30 years, I recognized the pattern. Not the names, the behavior. A dying man making a decision that looked generous, but smelled of surrender. You thought he was being coerced. No. I thought he was being rewritten. I sat forward. There is a difference, Wolfe said. Coercion implies struggle. Rewriting requires surrender. A dying man can be manipulated without even knowing it, especially if he believes he's correcting a past mistake. But the result is the same. The intent vanishes, replaced by what someone else wants him to mean. And you hate that, I said. Yes, Wolfe replied. I do. The room fell silent for a moment. Then Wolfe, in his usual fashion, broke the gravity of the moment without warning. Fritz, he bellowed, we will dine at 6. Serve the tart first. There was an acknowledgement from the kitchen. I leaned back and shook my head. You're impossible, you know that. Wolfe lifted his eyes just slightly. Yet indispensable. That was as close to gratitude as I was going to get. At 6, we dined. The tart was flawless. The veal is exquisite. The wine, a red Wolfe rarely touched, was poured in measured silence. Afterward, I settled back in my chair, watching him sip his final drop like a priest closing a ritual. You think Maddox ever knew what happened? I asked. Wolfe didn't hesitate. He knew enough. He knew someone else wanted to finish his story. And now, Wolfe said, his story ends as it should. Messy, humans. But his. That was the line. That was Wolfe's way. He doesn't fix people. He doesn't punish. He doesn't rewrite anything. He restores. And once it's restored, he lets it be. I stood, tucked my notes into the cabinet, and flicked off the office light. Another case closed. Another battle of words, wills and whispered motives behind us. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, the brownstone was whole again.